Welcome to The Gentler Conflict, a talk about dancing in the 18th century in America. I'm Sue Dupre, a local leader of historic country dances, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this presentation on behalf of the Old Barracks for Patriots Week 2020. You may have encountered me as the dance prompter for the Old Barracks Tavern Nights and for the Colonial Ball, one of the highlights of Patriots Week in Trenton each December. The hours at present are melancholy dull. Neither the rugged toil of war nor the gentler conflict of assembly balls is in my choice. These are the words of George Washington, writing as a younger man from the frontier. He is lamenting that his life is dull without battle or the delights of dancing. In a moment, you'll hear more about what dance meant to the people of the 18th century. As you look at the drawing on this slide, it becomes clear that I have to make an important qualification concerning the cultural context of this video. I'll be talking primarily about dancing within the middle and upper classes of English-derived society, because that's what I know the most about. Historians certainly know that there were musicians and dance masters of color, both enslaved and free, and that people of color danced both the dances of African culture as well as adapting the dances of the society surrounding them in America. You may be interested in learning more about the contributions of these people to dance in America. I'd recommend that you watch Phil Jameson's video discussion about contributions of the Black population to Appalachian square dancing, which certainly does include 18th century influences. Phil is a square dance caller, and his talk is called Hoedowns, Reels, and Frolics, Roots and Branches of Southern Appalachian Dance. I'll include a link to it in the resources section at the end of my presentation. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the following topics. First, how important was dancing in 18th century American society? Secondly, what types of dances did people do, and what did these dances look like? Thirdly, how did 18th century people learn these dances? Fourthly, where were these dances done, and what happened at a fancy dance? And finally, I'll share some exciting tidbits about dancing in Philadelphia, Trenton, and Princeton. In general, dancing was an essential skill for most of the 18th century. So who danced and why? There certainly must have been 18th century folks who disliked dancing, or some who thought it was sinful. And then there were others who simply couldn't figure out how to dance well enough to be welcomed on the dance floor. Remember Mr. Collins from Pride and Prejudice? But generally, the ability to dance competently was a sign of a well-bred lady or gentleman who possessed the necessary social graces to succeed in the world. This was true for both the middle and the upper classes. Many social opportunities to meet other people involved dancing, so dancing was not only a desirable, but often a necessary skill. We know about 18th century attitudes towards dance and about dance events from diaries and journals and newspapers and advertisements and pocket companions and dance manuals that survive from the 18th century. These are just a sampling of the many quotes about dancing found in 18th century diaries and journals. I'll read a few of the more interesting ones. In 1774, Philip Fithian said, "At about 7, the ladies and gentlemen began to dance in the ballroom. First minuets, 1 round, second jigs, third reels, and last of all country dances. The ladies were dressed gay and splendid, and when dancing, their silks and brocades rustled and trailed behind them." In 1798, Mary Ridgely in Philadelphia said, "We had a grand ball on the 23rd of February. Ours was charming. I never enjoyed myself so much in my life." In 1785 in Connecticut, Robert Hunter said, "The ladies were perfectly free and easy in their manners. You get acquainted with them almost immediately. They were almost all handsome women and danced remarkably well." In 1789 in Maryland, Molly Tillman said, "I went determined not to dance, but who can resist the temptation of a super excellent partner?" And finally, in 1771 in Connecticut, William Gregory said, "And the beauty of it all was that the room we had to dance in was so small that we jostled against each other, sometimes intended." Over the course of the 100 years of the 18th century, the dances danced at social events like balls and assemblies were the minuet, country dances, cotillions, and reels. Not all these dances were popular at the same time. For instance, cotillions were not danced until the later 18th century. These dances weren't unique to America. Americans in the 18th century danced the same dances that were popular in England, though the names of dances weren't always the same. For instance, I'm quite sure that the English did not embrace the American country dance called Stony Point, which commemorated the defeat of Sir Henry Clinton at Stony Point, New York in 1779. Over the next few slides, we'll take a look at each of these four dance forms. In the 18th century, the minuet was an elegant dance of display for one couple at a time. Imagine that you and your partner are alone on the ballroom dance floor with the eyes of all the other people in the room on you. You and your partner dance your best minuet steps for this crowd with such elegance and confidence that it seems as though you had never had to practice at all, although in fact, the intricate steps of the minuet required meticulous practice. I wonder if this unspoken competition to be the most elegant dancer of a minuet was what George Washington had in mind when he referred to dancing as the gentler conflict. In a moment, we'll watch as a modern-day couple dances the minuet. In this video from the burning of Kingston Ball in 2011, we'll watch Neil DeMarino and Sue Braisted dance a portion of a minuet called Le Minuet d'Alcide. One of the things to look for as this couple dances is the pattern they trace on the floor. Looking at the dancers from above, you'd see them tracing a Z-shaped pattern as they dance the figures. This is characteristic of a minuet. The time signature of a minuet is in 3/4, and the stepping is characterized by a bending of a knee and sinking on beats 2 and 6 of the 6-beat musical phrase. The stepping pattern would be 1 sink, 3, 4, 5, sink, 1 sink, 3, 4, 5, sink, and so on. Unlike the minuet, which required specialized knowledge and extensive practice to dance it well, country dances were much more accessible. For instance, the footwork was simpler than a minuet. Although there had been more variety in the formations of country dances in the 17th century, by the 18th century, country dances were primarily danced in a long column of couples called a long way set. Country dances really dominated the world of social dancing in England and America throughout the 18th century, and thousands of country dances were published, though often dances with the same figures had multiple names. We'll be taking a look at a video clip of a country dance, but it's helpful to know a bit about the structure of a country dance before you see the clip. When we see the clip, we'll see couples standing in long way sets. The head of the sets are to the right of the screen. The figures of the dance are performed in groups of 3 couples. Each group has its own couple 1 on the right end of that group. We'll be watching a specific couple 1 and their group. Notice the couple on the right-hand side of the video. Lady 1 has a lace cap and is wearing a white mask, and Gent 1 is the woman in a red short jacket with a white cap. We're watching a late 18th century dance called Away to the Camp. Its figures are: ladies dance around the gents dance around the ladies, first couple down the center, back, and cast off, and allemans. You'll know that they're doing the allemans when they link arms with their partners in a contortionist way. After the allemans, that couple 1 are done with the old group of 2 couples, but they're still couple 1, so they take the next group of 2 couples and repeat the same figures. After viewing the clip once, we're going to learn more about how country dances work.
Ladies. And now men. And one's lead down the middle. Lead back up and cast. 2s move up. Everyone, allemande or right hand turn. And left. First lady, lead those other ladies around.
We'll watch the sequence a couple more times just to give you the idea of how the dance works. Continue watching the couple number 1 we first watched. They're still couple 1, and you can tell because it's that same lady 1 with the white cap and mask who leads the line of women around each time. Each time through the dance, couple 1 will progress past 1 couple and take up the next 2 couples in line to start again. So we learn that couple 1 moves down the set 1 place each time through the dance. They will ultimately reach the bottom of the set and will no longer be a couple 1. Meanwhile, couples 2 and 3 move up the set 1 place each time and will gradually reach the top. When a couple reaches the top, they become a new couple 1. And that, in a nutshell, is how an 18th century country dance works. Now watch the dance a little longer and see if you observe how the couples move up or down the set 1 place each time.
Now the men. First man, go. One's lead down. Allemande. And back. 3 ladies. First lady, lead them around.
Don't ever shake.
And now the men. One's lead down. And allemande. First lady, go.
The third type of dance I listed earlier was the cotillion. Cotillions were danced in square formation with 4 couples, and yes, they certainly were the direct ancestor of American square dances. Cotillions used country dance type figures, although the figures were often more complex than country dances, and cotillions utilized more complex footwork. Cotillions were a French derivation, were introduced into England in the 1760s, and would have made their way to America almost immediately. In 1768, in Lloyd's Evening Post, a notice appeared that said, "A country dance of a new nature called a cotillion, and which admits but of 8 persons, has lately been introduced in the polite world from France, and is now in great esteem among our people of quality." Cotillions had a verse and chorus structure, just like a song, except that instead of calling it a verse in a cotillion, they called it a figure. And the chorus was referred to as the changes. So in a cotillion, you would dance the changes, the figure, the changes, the figure, the changes, the figure, and so on. The changes were simple standard figures, but the figure was more complex and unique to each cotillion. So Mr. Turner's Academy cotillion and the Marlbrook cotillion might have had the same changes, but the figure for each was totally different. The final and simplest type of dance on my list is the reel, sometimes called the Scotch Reel. Reels were typically danced by 3 or 4 people in a line, weaving past each other and periodically stopping to show off their best footwork. The drawing on the left, dated 1776, shows a caricature of 2 couples engaged in a rowdy reel. The figure in the middle shows the shape of the pattern of the weaving as 4 people dance past each other. And the photo on the right shows 4 Regency dancers dancing a reel. Reels were still popular during the Regency. You can definitely see that they are stepping to each other. Reels didn't require as many people as a country dance, and they were simpler to dance, so reels were more likely to be done by lower class folks and at more informal events. The timeline for a typical ball or assembly often proceeded in this order. Minuets were danced first, 1 couple at a time, starting with the highest status couple. The minuet phase of the dance might take 2 to 3 hours, depending on the number of attendees. By the time the minuets were over, the dancers were more than ready for the ease and release of the country dances and cotillions. Sometime around midnight, a light supper would be served. After supper, dancing would resume with more country dances until the company was exhausted, perhaps as late as 5 a.m. This may seem like an extreme amount of time to devote to dancing, but many people were avid and skilled dancers. You might know that George Washington was devoted to dancing. There are many quotes about Washington's love of dance, including this one about an evening of dancing in Middlebrook, New Jersey, in March of 1779. General Nathanael Greene wrote to a friend that, quote, "His Excellency and Mrs. Greene danced upwards of 3 hours without once sitting down," end of quote. That Washington and General Greene's wife danced together for so long may seem gossip-worthy until you learn that General Greene had injured his leg as a young man while sneaking off to a dance. He went to the dance anyway and was left with a permanent limp. I think it speaks very well of General Greene that he didn't begrudge his wife the opportunity to dance. So here you are at this assembly, and the country dance portion has begun. Imagine that you have secured a partner and are standing in a long way set, ready for a country dance. The first issue is to find out what dance you're about to do. In the 18th century, country dance programs were not selected ahead of time. By the later part of the century, it was the practice for the dance that you're about to do to be chosen by the lady at the very top of the set. That's lady number 1. The 3 couples at the topmost part of the set would begin dancing the chosen dance. Only those 3 couples would be dancing. The rest of you will be watching them dance or conversing with your partner and the people around you. After one round of the dance, couple number 1 will have moved one place further down the set. That original couple 1 will still be couple 1 and will dance the figures again with the next two couples. The process of couple 1 gradually moving down the set as they complete each round of the dance will continue. Eventually, couple 1 will reach you and your partner, at which time you'll get to start dancing. The couples below the original couple 1 in the set will gradually move up the set as couple move 1 moves down the set. And eventually, each couple will reach the top of the set and become a couple 1. The dance will continue until the original couple 1 has progressed all the way down the set and all the way back up the set to their original position. At a ball or assembly, there was no dance master, no caller, no prompter to tell you what to do. So the second issue for you is knowing what to do when the dancing finally reaches you. You could, of course, watch the dancing couples ahead of you and memorize the figures they're doing. But really, you were expected to know the dances. And that's where the dancing master comes into the picture. Dancing masters seem to have been ubiquitous in America. They appeared in cities, in towns, in the country, in homes, at boarding schools, and in their own dancing schools. Parents took it very seriously that their children learned to dance. For example, in 1748, the Earl of Chesterfield wrote about dancing to his son Philip, who was away at boarding school. The Earl wrote, "Do you mind your dancing while your dancing master is with you? As you will be often under the necessity of dancing a minuet, I would have you dance it very well. Remember that the graceful motion of the arms, the giving your hand, and the putting on and pulling off your hat genteelly are the material parts of a gentleman's dancing. But the greatest advantage of dancing well is that it necessarily teaches you to present yourself, to sit, stand, and walk genteelly, all of which are of real importance to a man of fashion." In this drawing, we see here a dancing master with a young girl as his student. You'll note that he holds a small pocket violin in his left hand. This is clearly a family that could afford to pay for a dancing master to come to their home and present regular dance lessons. In more rural areas, dancing masters would establish regular circuitous routes to visit plantations or wealthy homes, stopping at each one for a few days. Students would be dismissed from their regular classes during those visits. In the afternoons or evenings, family members would join in the dancing. In a moment, we'll talk about how middle-class families acquired dance instruction. Many dancing masters established schools for those not able to afford private lessons, although you did have to be a genteel kind of person to attend those lessons. On the next slide, we'll be looking at advertisements for some of those dancing masters and their schools. Itinerant dancing masters traveled throughout the countryside to villages and towns. They often settled in a town for a few weeks, establishing their dancing school in a tavern. These dance lessons offered a significant source of income for taverns, so a tavern might be willing to build a second-floor ballroom. For one traveling dancing master, the Connecticut Gazette announced the following in July of 1760, quote, "W.C. Hewlett, dancing master from New York, has opened a dancing school in Hartford where the minuet and country dances are taught. 'Tis hoped that those gentlemen and ladies that intend doing him the honor of instructing them will apply as soon as possible, he being obliged to return to New York at a limited time." Close quote. For these short-term dancing schools, the dancing master would hold an assembly after the dancing school had completed its course to allow the students to showcase their new skills. In addition to these dancing schools, dancing manuals were published to supplement dance education. Even ladies' magazines carried instructions for the latest dances. There are many examples of dancing master advertisements from the 18th century. Reading them, we discover that many of the dancing masters are French. Study the names in these ads. Even Peter Curtis says that he's from France. Mr. Quesnay teaches in Philadelphia. Mr. Curtis teaches in Portsmouth. And Mr. Trotter and Mr. Vianney teach in New York. Although most dancing masters were men, there were occasionally women who worked as dancing masters. To protect their reputations, the women had to be careful about where they taught men, but women still were usually accepted as dancing masters. The ads are often a delight to read. For example, in one of Mr. Vianney's ads, he cautions people that, although he teaches in the style of the best masters of Europe, his scholars have not had time to perfect their minuets. According to the Philadelphia Dance History Journal, at least 26 dance masters operated in Philadelphia between 1710 to 1776. Considering that Quaker attitudes about frivolous entertainments might be expected to still hold sway in Philadelphia, it's surprising to see such interest in dancing. In 1740, there was a bit of a to-do about dancing when the famous Methodist minister George Whitefield came to Philadelphia. His exhortations against dancing caused that night's concert and ball to be canceled. But the attendees came back and held their concert and dance within the week. Benjamin Franklin initially reported that the participants had been persuaded against dancing by the doctrine of the gospel, but he had to print a retraction when it turned out that they were back to their frivolous ways the very next day. There were dancing schools and venue halls throughout the city. This map shows the venue on 2nd Street for several dancing schools over the years. The U.S. Customs House is now located here. In the 1790s, the original city tavern was the site of dances held by the Philadelphia Dancing Assembly. But dancing was widespread throughout the Delaware Valley region and wasn't limited to Philadelphia, as we're about to see. Trenton, too, was a hotbed of dancing delights. At one point following the Revolutionary War, Congress moved to Trenton and met in the French Arms Tavern in late 1784. The tavern was located on the southwest corner of King Street, now known as Warren Street, and 2nd Street, now known as State Street. The building that housed the tavern was the largest in 18th century Trenton, and it included a room known as the Long Room, 20 feet wide and 43 feet long, ideal for dance assemblies. Almost 2 years before Congress arrived, in late January 1783, the New York Gazette reported that Mr. Dorsier had announced his intention to open a dancing school at the French Arms Tavern. Mr. Dorsier planned to open the school in Trenton, alternating with a school at a tavern in Princeton. He would teach, quote, all sorts of dances, the most in fashion, but principally the graces and manners, close quote. Do keep Mr. Dorsier's name in mind as we move on to the next slides. And now let us consider an elegant event that took place in Princeton. A New York newspaper announced an event to take place in Princetown, 6th August, 1774. According to the newspaper, Mr. Hoare begs leave to acquaint the ladies and gentlemen of this neighborhood that on Monday evening, the 22nd instant, at Mr. Whitehead's Long Room, in this town, he will have a concert. The concert to be divided into 3 parts, with 4 songs in each part, and the whole to conclude with a ball, which shall be conducted on the same plan as at Bath, Tunbridge, Scarborough, and all the polite assemblies in London or any other part of Great Britain. Price of tickets, $1 each, tea and coffee included. Note well, Mr. Whitehead takes this opportunity to acquaint the ladies and gentlemen who intend honoring the concert and ball with their presence that every genteel accommodation will be provided on his part for their reception. According to our peerless investigator, Mr. John Burkhalter, Mr. Whitehead's Long Room was located in Princeton near the southern end of Nassau Street. But not everything was elegant in Princeton. A document titled Journal at Nassau Hall, March 1786, mentions that there was, quote, dancing in Nassau Hall, up and down the entry as a Negro played upon the violin, with 20 students hallooing and tearing about, end of quote. And earlier, in 1783, the minutes from a meeting of the trustees of the College of New Jersey, now known as Princeton University, record that a French dancing master, identity not recorded but easily inferred to be Mr. Dorsier, had come to Princeton and was giving lessons in one of the taverns. The trustees thought this was useless because the students were no longer young enough to be taught good manners, and it was expected that their behavior would damage the reputation of the college and would promote disorderliness. It was unanimously resolved that henceforth attendance at the dancing master's salon be strictly forbidden to the students. There is much more I could share with regard to dancing in the 18th century, but I think that we should end by pondering on what those Princeton students may or may not have contributed to the American culture of dancing. If you have questions about any aspect of this video presentation, I'll be happy to try to answer your questions. Email the Old Barracks at info@barracks.org and your question will be referred to me. Hopefully, this presentation will have inspired in you an urge to do some dancing. The Patriots Week Colonial Ball is usually scheduled for the last Friday in each December. We hope to see you at the next ball. Country dances are still danced in the 21st century, and novice dancers are always welcome. Contact me via the Old Barracks email address for more info, or contact me via a Facebook message. So we meet face to face. I apologize for the mostly 21st century garb I'm wearing. You can't see it, but I have 18th century style shoes on, I promise. I'm grateful that you've watched this presentation, and I hope you found it informative and entertaining. I'll respond promptly to any questions or comments you submit through the Old Barracks email or through my Facebook timeline. I hope you'll remain for the next couple of slides, which offer important acknowledgments and a listing of useful resources. Good day. This Gentler Conflict program is made possible in part by the Mercer County Cultural and Heritage Commission through funding from the Mercer County Board of Chosen Freeholders and the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, which is a partner agency of the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Old Barracks Museum. Delightful music for the program was provided by Early Music Princeton, which features Matthew McDonald, he's a graduate student in history at Princeton University, playing violin, and John Burkhalter, an independent scholar, playing small flute, for their renditions of several of the 18th century country dance tunes. And I owe big thanks to John for sharing his research into 18th century music and dance venues in New Jersey. Patricia Graham graciously gave permission for use of the Minuet video clip, and Janice Wolk, on behalf of the North River Historical Dancers, gave permission for use of the country dance video clips. Music on the country dance clips is being played by Anne and Ridley Enslow. I thank Antoine Watts and Abigail Shelley for permission to use their photo as the cover photo for this video presentation. And finally, I must pat myself on the back for surviving the process of learning to use video editing software. Please continue to the following slides for information about some of the resources I used in developing this program.